All right, so imagine this. You're getting ready for this big meeting about Ecuador, right? Maybe a big investment opportunity or
Yeah.
some high-level diplomatic thing, and you think you're all prepped, you got your stuff together.
Right, you're feeling good.
Exactly. Then, bam, news hits about these massive blackouts across the entire country,
Yeah.
political chaos, the economy's like on the verge of falling apart. Talk about a curveball, huh?
Throws everything you thought you knew out the window.
No kidding. So that's where we come in with this deep dive. We're going to unpack this whole Ecuadorian energy crisis, going through news reports, interviews, all that, so you're not left in the dark.
We're talking about arming you with the knowledge to walk into that meeting like you've been following this for months.
100%. By the end of this, you'll be the one everyone else is looking to for answers, not scrambling for them.
Exactly.
So let's start with what we're seeing on the ground. Televisoras, they're one of the main news channels in Ecuador, right?
Right, big one.
They've been all over these rolling blackouts, showing how these outages, a lot of them scheduled during like the busiest times of day,
Yeah, peak hours, brutal.
totally are turning people's lives upside down.
Mm.
Work, families, you name it, it's all affected.
It's one thing to hear about an energy crisis, but seeing how it directly impacts people, that's what really drives it home.
Totally agree. This isn't some abstract economic indicator. This is real life for people.
Yeah.
And obviously, it's fueling a ton of debate about what's really at the heart of this mess.
Right, everyone wants answers.
Exactly. And the government's pointing to this really bad drought. They call it an estiage. That's their dry season.
Right, STR.
But some experts are saying, hold on, this wasn't a total surprise, this drought. We're talking folks like those at Vera Asumanera, that political analysis blog.
Mm-hmm.
And then there's Primicius. They're a well-respected news outlet.
Yeah, they're not just going to toe the party line.
No way. And they're both saying there might be more to this than meets the eye. Like, this drought was bad, yeah, but was it totally unforeseeable?
And that's the key question, isn't it? Because if there were warning signs, then the next question is, what was done to prepare?
Exactly. And that's where this whole thing gets really interesting, because when we look at Ecuador's energy setup, well, let's just say they put a lot of their eggs in one basket.
Yeah, that's one way to put it. And it's a basket that relies heavily on something that's now in short supply water.
Exactly.
So when you have a country that depends so much on hydroelectric power, like Ecuador does, and then you get hit with a drought this severe,
It's a recipe for trouble.
well, it's like forgetting to water your plants and then wondering why they're wilting. The problem isn't just the drought, it's the lack of, let's say, backup options. They haven't exactly diversified their energy portfolio.
Okay, so that's a good point. So you're saying this situation has really exposed a weakness in how they've set things up. And maybe this could have been cushioned a bit if they'd invested in other types of energy, right?
Precisely. It's like putting all your money on one horse in a race. If that horse doesn't win.
You're out of luck.
Exactly.
And it seems like a lot of people are starting to ask, well, why wasn't there a plan B? Like Vera Osumanera, they're not holding back, saying previous administrations, they kind of dropped the ball on this whole diversification thing. They knew the risks, or at least they should have.
Right. So the question becomes, why weren't those warnings heeded? And were there any efforts made to address these potential problems?
Yeah, and then there's this whole other thing, like whispers of sabotage being thrown around.
Right. Can't forget about that.
Like the government is putting a lot of blame on sabotage for making these energy shortages even worse than they might have been.
Right. And that's a whole other can of worms because it raises questions about security, about potential political motivations.
Oh, totally. And Primitius, they're hinting that this whole sabotage angle could be a way for the government to shift the blame.
Classic tactic, isn't it? When in doubt, blame outside forces. It's easier than taking responsibility for maybe not being as prepared as you could have been.
Totally. Yeah. It's easier to point the finger at some shadowy figures than to say, hey, maybe we messed up somewhere.
Exactly. And for someone like you who's got this big Ecuador meeting coming up, that's a red flag, wouldn't you say? Makes you wonder about their stability, their reliability.
It adds a whole other layer of complication. It's not just about the lights being off. It's about how the government's dealing with it and what that says about them. And honestly, the lack of clear information from them isn't helping.
The less transparent they are, the more those rumors and suspicions are going to swirl.
It creates this breeding ground for mistrust.
Oh, 100%.
And we're seeing that reflected in a lot of the sources we looked at. People feel like they're being left in the dark, and they're frustrated.
And rightfully so. This is their lives we're talking about, their livelihoods.
Exactly. They want to know what's really going on, what solutions are being considered, and how those solutions might affect them.
People deserve a seat at the table, especially when it comes to something as crucial as energy.
Absolutely, they want to be part of the solution, not just passive bystanders.
Exactly.
So to sum it up, we've got this drought, which has really shown just how vulnerable Ecuador's energy setup is. They depend so much on hydroelectric power, which is great when you've got plenty of rain.
Right. Not so great when the well runs dry?
Exactly.
Mm.
But the question now is, how much of this whole crisis could have been avoided? If they'd planned better, invested in other energy sources, would things be this bad?
And if they hadn't, why not? And this is where getting into the nitty-gritty of Ecuador's energy grid, like really understanding the specifics, becomes super relevant for you.
Okay, so help me connect those dots because it sounds like it's more than just one reservoir running low on water. So what makes this Mazar reservoir so crucial?
So the Mazar Reservoir, Ray, it feeds into another one called Amaluza. And Amaluza, that's the one that powers the Paute Molino hydroelectric plant. And this plant, we're talking the second largest in the entire country.
Wow, okay, so this isn't some small-time operation.
Not at all. So picture this line of dominoes, right? Each one is a piece of their energy grid. The drought, that's what knocks over that first domino, the Mazar Reservoir.
I see, so it's like this chain reaction.
Exactly. The impact ripples down the line, taking out a big chunk of their energy supply. This isn't an isolated thing, this is systemic.
Gotcha. So it's like this drought, and specifically the issues with the Mazar Reservoir, they've really shown just how fragile their whole energy setup is.
Yeah.
It makes you wonder, what are their options now? How do they climb out of this hole, both right now and in the long run?
That is the million-dollar question, and it's not exactly a straightforward answer, unfortunately. There's no magic wand here, no single policy or project that's going to instantly fix this.
Right, there's no quick fix for this.
Exactly. But we are seeing a bunch of potential solutions being thrown around, each with its own pros and cons, and of course its own set of people who swear by it.
It's like everyone's got an opinion on the best way out.
Pretty much. So, you ready to dive into some of these solutions?
Yeah, let's break it down. Where do things get controversial? What are the big sticking points?
One of the biggest debates is about whether private companies should have a bigger role in Ecuador's energy sector. Some people are saying, look, to get out of this mess, to really modernize things, you need to attract private investment.
So they're thinking more long-term.
Exactly. They point to other countries where private companies came in with money, expertise, new tech, and really turned things around.
Mm.
It's about tackling the immediate crisis while also building for the future.
Right, like a two birds, one stone kind of deal. But I'm guessing not everyone is thrilled about that idea.
You got it. You've got a whole other group who are really wary of letting private companies have more control over something as important as energy.
Yeah, that makes sense.
Their concern is that prices will go up for everyday people if private companies are calling the shots. Less government oversight and this focus on profits over, like, making sure energy is affordable and accessible to everyone in the long run.
Right, it's a balancing act, for sure.
Mm-hmm.
You got to think about the immediate needs, but also the long-term impact on people's lives. It's not just about the bottom line.
Exactly. And then, of course, there's the whole question of alternative energy sources.
Yeah, I was just about to ask about that.
Mm.
What about things like solar, wind power? That seems like a no-brainer, right?
You'd think so. And there are a lot of people pushing for a fast transition to renewable energy, especially solar and wind. And listen, Ecuador, they've got a ton of potential for this stuff.
Oh yeah, they've got sunshine, they've got wind.
Exactly. This crisis has been a real wake-up call for a lot of folks, showing them just how risky it is to put all their eggs in the hydroelectric basket, especially with climate change making things so unpredictable.
So diversifying their energy mix, that seems crucial no matter what, right?
100%. But here's the thing, shifting to renewables on a large scale, that's not like flipping a switch.
Right, it's not an overnight thing.
Yeah.
So what's holding them back? What are the challenges?
Well, you need more than just good intentions. We're talking a ton of upfront investment, building new infrastructure, training workers, setting up whole new supply chains. All of that takes time and, of course, money.
And time and money are two things they might not have a lot of right now, especially with this crisis going on.
Exactly. It's a tough spot to be in.
So it's like they need to fix the roof while it's pouring rain, right? They need solutions now, but they've also got to think about the future, make sure this doesn't happen again. So what are the arguments against investing in renewables right now, given everything we've talked about?
Well, the main pushback you hear is all about timing. The folks who are hesitant, they're saying, look, Ecuador is in a really tight spot right now. They don't have the time to wait for a massive renewable energy overhaul.
Because as we said, that's not a quick fix.
Exactly. They need solutions that are going to bring the lights back on as soon as possible. And for some people, that means turning to more traditional energy sources, even if they're not as environmentally friendly.
Right? They might have to rely on things like fossil fuels, at least for a little while, to bridge the gap.
It's a tough pill to swallow, but that's the reality they're facing. It's about finding that balance, short-term needs versus long-term goals.
Hmm.
And then, of course, you've got the whole political side of this, which adds another layer of complexity.
Yeah, we haven't really touched on that yet, but it's a big one, right?
Huge. Think about it. You've got these blackouts, the economy's shaky, people are understandably worried. That's a breeding ground for frustration, for distrust in the government.
And that's exactly what we saw reflected in some of the sources we looked at, like Vera Asumanera. People feel like they're not getting the full story, and they're starting to lose faith that the government can actually fix this.
And when people lose faith, that's when things can get really unstable.
It's like this whole energy crisis could easily spill over into social unrest if it's not handled carefully.
100%. It's a powder keg, and the government knows it. So how they navigate this, how transparent they are, that's going to be crucial.
So to bring this all back to our listeners and that big meeting they're prepping for, imagine walking into that room with this knowledge. You're not just talking about the economic impact of this energy crisis, you're talking about the potential for instability, for social unrest. It changes the whole conversation, right?
Absolutely. This deep dive, it's shown us how interconnected all of these things are. We started with blackouts, and now we're talking about droughts, failing infrastructure, political maneuvering, people's lives being turned upside down.
It's a lot to wrap your head around, but it's the reality of the situation.
Exactly. And by understanding all these different angles, our listeners, they're going to be so much better equipped to have a productive, informed discussion about Ecuador.
Whether they're talking investments, diplomatic strategies, or just trying to make sense of what's happening over there, it all comes back to understanding the bigger picture.
100%. Don't just scratch the surface, dig deeper, connect the dots.
It's like we've pieced together a puzzle.
Yeah.
Right? We started with these news reports about blackouts, and now we're looking at this really complex picture. And with that knowledge, our listeners, they're not just going into that meeting, they're going in with a game plan.
Exactly. They're prepared, they're informed, and they're ready to contribute to a solution.
Well said. So, as you head into that meeting, keep in mind, what's happening in Ecuador, it's not just an energy problem. It's a glimpse into the challenges that a lot of countries are facing right now, how to balance economic growth with protecting the planet, how to plan for the long term when everything feels so immediate, and how to build trust and transparency during uncertain times.
And those are challenges that require everyone to be engaged, informed, and ready to work towards solutions.
Couldn't have said it better myself. Thanks for joining us for this deep dive into Ecuador's energy crisis. We hope you feel more informed, more prepared, and ready to tackle those tough conversations. Remember, knowledge is power, and now you've got it. Use it wisely.